Well, Robin, thank you for joining me on the Livelong podcast today. We have a little bit of a tradition that we start out with that we ask all of our guests. First, what did you eat for breakfast today?
I always eat the same thing. My kids have oatmeal, and I get the scraps at the bottom of the oatmeal pan because there's never enough for me. So I eat that, and then like whatever fruit that was cut up that remains on the counter is what I end up eating.
Has that changed over the years? One, as your kids have gotten older, and two, as you perhaps have taken a little bit more interest in your own personal health?
I wouldn't necessarily say. I mean, I've been thinking about what I eat for a very long time, but I would say that I definitely have a little bit of I don't like to see food go to waste. So no matter what my kids are eating, I tend to eat the scraps of whatever's left. And I would say that's been going on since they were little.
Next question would be, what wearables do you wear every day, or do you currently sort of utilize?
Oh boy, that's a loaded question for someone like me, Britt. I have a lot of wearables, a lot. When I am in town at home, I sleep on an 8 sleep bed and mattress, which is incredible. Like, I love that product. Like, it's amazing. I've been an Aura user. I have 6 years worth of Aura data every single day. In 6 years, I certainly have tried things like Whoop and etc., but I really like the form factor of the Aura. So I tend to sort of stick to things that I like to use and sort of make sure they're very sticky. Like Aura, I only have to charge it like every 4 or 5 days, so it's really nice from that standpoint. I'm a big Garmin and Wahoo user, so I've used both on my bike in one form or another, and I have some hiking watch. Like I have a hiking watch that I use that's Garmin. I have a golf watch that I use that's Garmin, and then I have a bunch of different cycling computers that I sort of split up between Wahoo and Garmin. And then what other wearables do I use? I do have an Apple Watch on. You can see it right now. So I do some recording of things on that as well. I do. There's a feature I love on the Apple Watch, the new one, which is that there is a UV sensor on the watch, and it actually tells you how many minutes a day you're outside.
Love that.
So for me, that's like a really important metric. Is just like, even if it's I only have time to get out for a dog walk, like, have I been outside more than 20 minutes in general? So I really like that UV sensor sort of data that comes off the Apple Watch.
And do all of these wearables, do they all speak to each other? Is that something that you're looking for in this? Because
all of them speak through our platform, through the outside platform. So I get to connect them in and see a bunch of different things and share that with people. And we continue to refine that, but that's it's certainly our goal to connect all those pieces.
Yeah, it seems like, especially as tech becomes much more integrated into our daily lives, certainly with wearables and the data that they provide, it's how do we consolidate all of this data? And I don't want to go too deep down that rabbit hole, but I think I just saw Strava cut off their third-party app integrations, which to me seems like just cutting off a major leg there. But I think with outside, with the feed and with what y'all are doing, it seems like that's a pretty big win for you.
Yeah, we bought my old company back, Map My Fitness, and Map My, they have, I think, 9,000 API partners already. So that's everything from healthcare companies to third-party devices, etc. And I would just say my general belief, I won't comment, on anything specific of what's going on, but my general belief is that, it's the user's data, and the user should be able to decide where and how they want that distributed and where they want that to go. And even if people claim things like they're trying to protect your privacy, my view is like that's not really, or it shouldn't be. The company should be making sure you can control all the privacy settings, but ultimately, to me, it should be up to the user.
Certainly with the access we have to that data now, thanks to the technology that we have. One more of our rapid fire questions. What is part of your daily routine And let's maybe even just go back as far as 6 years, since that's when you said you started wearing your Aura. What is part of your daily routine that you absolutely cannot live without, and you notice a pretty big change when you don't get to do it?
I mean, look, for me, it's like I last year I think I did some sort of activity 330 days last year. So I don't miss many days from an activity perspective, whether that's like being on the Zwift bike indoors. But I would say generally I try to go outdoors at least once a day. And if I count dog walks, then I'm definitely out there every single day. And I would just say, like, I notice a difference when I don't spend time outdoors.
Is that something that has been part of your life, your entire life? And I ask that kind of in the way of how has your perhaps love of being outdoors shaped your understanding and connection to health? And we are Livelong Media, so we talk about longevity. So how has it kind of shaped that connection to health and longevity?
Yeah, I mean, fortunately, I grew up in Denver. Obviously, I at a young age, I wouldn't say I had an incredible amount of access to the outdoors because I lived in inner city Denver. And so I looked at the mountains a lot, but I didn't necessarily get there a lot until I started riding my bike when I was 8, 9 years old. And started racing. But I would say that, like, I think there was, because Denver is a place where it's 300 days a year of sunshine. I would just say it was always part of my daily activity was something outdoors, right? Whether that was before or after school, whether it was being very serious about that activity like cycling or more casual. I would just say it's been some part of my life really since you could argue since I was 4 or 5 years old even, right? And so I definitely. How I think about it, though, I think is important is that, if you read something like Peter Attia's book on, Outlive, right?
Mm-hmm.
I think that I very much believe this sort of thesis that, most people, the maybe serious conditions they get start many, many, many years before they know. It could be, I think the average is like 7 years before you even know that you might have a symptom or something, right? And so, the way that I think about it is like, it's kind of like investing, like dollar cost averaging in investing is like the biggest miracle of investing. Like if you are consistently putting, like as an example, I use this platform for my kids called Acorns and Acorns, like every single week it pulls something out of my checking or out of their savings account and invests it, in the markets. And I've done it since they were basically like babies, and like it is amazing with a small amount each day and rounding up and things that they do on that platform, just how well they have done my kids are 8, 11, and 13, and that is literally, to me, only because of consistency. It has nothing to do with the ups and downs of the market, nothing. It just has to do with putting money aside every week. And I think about fitness and longevity in the same way, which is anybody who tries to, I don't know, like, again, this is the way I think about dieting or some of these things. Like anybody that is trying in a very short amount of time to, quote, fix their health, to me, that's not a thing really. I mean, I know that it's important for, like, let's say you're getting ready for a wedding. There is a part that maybe you're putting in and investing in more time, or you join a running group and maybe you're running more frequently than you did before and that's awesome. But I think people need to think about and set their expectations right with those things, because to me it's all about consistency and, like putting the work in and that journey that you have to do over long periods of time if you really want it to pay off.
I think what really stands out to me about Outlive is, and I think he refers to it, Peter T, I think he refers to it as medicine 3.0, where he talks about getting in front of the problems, or I think the metaphor he uses is catching the eggs before they're dropped. It's something like that. I hope I'm not slaughtering his metaphor too much. And for some reason that resonated with me a lot. And especially when you think about fitness and you think about activity and how it seems so much of this has been reactive. Certainly within the past maybe 20 or 30 years. I'm nearing 40, so I don't have a quite as long of a span to really extract data from. But now we are at this place where we can be a little bit more informed. We have wearables and tech telling us everything that we used to go to doctors to check up on and then have to adjust there. Something you mentioned, and again has stuck with me from Denver Startup Week. I saw you speak. You dropped a statistic about the average amount of time that children are spending outdoors today. And if you could remember that, it's a very short number. I think you said something like 7 minutes. Is that correct?
They're spending less time outdoors every day than somebody that's incarcerated in the United States, right? Like,
yeah,
that to me is it is, and I think there's a combination of reasons why, right? I think when you read, there's a really great book called The Anxious Generation that talks about and does a lot of research on things like screen time and everything, which is more of I would say a more recent phenomena, right? Part of the reason kids are not spending as much time outdoors actually goes back into the 70s and 80s, in that we started to, a lot of like what I'd call the news media and a lot of the, sort of information that was out there, I think scared parents like about, abductions and things like that, and living in highly urban areas started to contribute to this idea that maybe it wasn't as safe for your kids to go outdoors, right? And so I think that, so it sort of built up on that. But I think what's happened since screens have come around is that, you sort of, you put those two things together, and now you have like this sort of digital babysitter that, parents can put their kids in front of, and they're, quote, not worried about them. But, the reality is, like, there's a lot of pretty ugly stuff going on in, whether it's Roblox or other these environments that, you would argue is, I would argue maybe is even more unsafe than sending them to a park a mile away, right? And so, I think we there's sort of a, cascading of events that have gotten us to this point. But I think screens have really accelerated it. I think that, the big misperception during COVID, and I would say, I say misperception in that there was so much news media around the fact people were spending more time outdoors during COVID, right? Because they were at home, they had more time. But actually, in the aggregate, because people stopped commuting and there was like home delivery for everything, actually people are spending a lot less time outside because they're not doing something like just even going to the grocery store to get groceries. That's being delivered to your door by Instacart. And so you're barely opening your door and putting your hand out and pulling the bags in, type of thing. And so, I think during COVID, there's never been a time in human history that we've spent as much time indoors as we are right now.
With your career, though, which is focused on, it seems like two very opposite ends there. You've got a career focused in technology while also being, a steward of the outdoors. How do you see these tools helping people build consistent, healthy habits that are outdoors? Because it seems like that's an interesting, combination. And I guess with that, not just for children, but for people in my generation and then the generation that came before me, where we adopted technology halfway through being active outdoors all the time, and now it's, we're having to integrate it into our life and try to find that balance. So I guess, how do you see those tools helping people build those habits?
Well, I think there's some really direct, whether it be things like Trailforks or Gaia or MapMyFitness that, very clearly help you navigate the outdoors and sort of get the information that you're looking for, or as you were asking, like the ability to integrate your Garmin and then see all that data, back or share that data with friends. I think all of these are, really good developments because, my own belief is that, like, if you go out on an adventure somewhere, whether it's just a day hike or it's, a big bike ride, multi-day, and you're sharing all of that, then, if I see that, I am more likely to want to go do that, right? So I think there is very positive aspects of, what I call the social ecosystem, the use of technology to better understand the environment around us and really kind of help us, sort of develop our skills and do better over time with, tips and tricks and, what's the right gear. Like if I know what the weather is and I know the route you're going on, like can I suggest the right gear? And if you have a better experience by, say, having the right gear and knowing where to go, that you're more likely to do it again, right? So like there are these, very positive aspects of technology. I think that what I'm most concerned about, whether it's for kids or it's for adults, is that there's also a very addictive side of almost like what I call lost time. So you start to see someone desk scrolling on a social media platform and all of a sudden an hour has gone by or 2 hours have gone by, right? And the question is like, did any part of that scrolling really do something for you and your health or wellness or longevity? Some people would argue with me, well, maybe they learned something from an influencer that they didn't know before and they can apply that later. And I go, okay, so there are parts of it where you go, okay, there are things I could sort of get on board with. But I think in general, I remember once this person on LinkedIn, I was talking about, kids and outdoor time, and the person said, just stop whining and tell your kids to go outdoors. Just tell them, And I'm like, look, I don't think, if I look at my kids who were 8, 11, and 13, it is a constant battle, right? And that battle is because those devices and that technology is very, very addictive, right? So I think technologies, you can't put the genie back in the bottle. It's kind of like these discussions about like AI, like take all AI down and forget it. It's not going to happen, right? It's done.
Can't go back.
Can't go back. So I think that companies in the space like Outside or others have to think about how we use the technology to, basically create these behaviors, because that's kind of what we're up against, right? These social platforms are, mobile devices, they're using behavioral science to get you addicted. And so I think we have to use similar tactics to try to get people to go outdoors. And that could be rewards, that could be triggers in the environment, reminders, things like, maybe as I'm using example, maybe you've scrolled for 20 minutes and then all of a sudden it says, hey, Britt, like, don't forget to go outdoors and get some sunshine on your face, right? Like, I think we have to think about layering technology in a productive way that ultimately is not putting the genie back in the bottle, but is sort of acting as a stimulus for you to want to go do those activities in real time. And, so I would say that's largely how at least for Outside and our product teams, how I think about it in terms of building new product that hopefully will create that environment for, not only the current generations, but next generations as well.
Yeah. I mean, that's a kind of a great point that I wanted to bring up specifically with Outside and what you're doing, because, I'm a longtime reader of many of the publications at Outside, and a lot of it, I go to it for a primary news source for certain, for a lot of the cycling and mountain biking. And so I wonder how the content and the tools under Outside, under the entire umbrella, are helping individuals improve their health, not just from like a knowledge of the industry and sport, but also just improve my health and lifespan.
We talk about this journey all the time about, first the content is supposed to inspire you. Then from there, like, again, if you're reading an article about the top 5 surf towns, around the world, how do we activate you? How do we take you from reading that content to actually getting you, whether it be to go do an event, whether it be to, go on that trip? How do we create an environment that makes it really easy to go from inspiration to activation, and then ultimately into celebration? Because the moment, I always say, like, you go on a great trip, like if let's say you were going surfing for 5 days with your friends and you have a great trip, like, those moments aren't celebrated enough. Like, they don't get enough attention. I mean, social certainly has allowed some of this attention, right? But I'm saying, like, in the form where other people that are really interested in, the details around that trip so that they could go do it, how do you do that and how do you celebrate that in the right way? Again, whether it's an event like you're going to do an Ironman or it's a big, 5-day cycling trip in the Dolomites, like, how do you kind of create this sort of continuous path because our belief is once you get someone into that celebration mode and they're starting to share it with their community, that they have a much more high likelihood of doing it again, on some consistency. Again, whether that be whatever category you're talking about, running, cycling, hiking, you could put golf in there. All of these things that are done outdoors, we feel like there's sort of this flywheel that has to keep happening.
Yeah. I mean, and that, again, coming back to longevity and the conversation around that, it's how do we increase supposed health span, right? I think it's one thing to think about, I want to live as long as possible, but I want to be able to ride my bike as long as possible. I want to be able to continue to find a purpose for as long as possible. So I guess I wonder, and you sort of answered it, how is outside leading that conversation? How are you sort of like pushing that flywheel, or is it really just about getting people to recognize that first step, and then outside really kind of takes it from there and helps them, like you said, get on the flywheel and just keep that momentum going?
Yeah, I think for us, obviously we've launched this social platform to be able to do that. The activity feed, we believe that everybody should have a very personalized experience. Like, again, the things that you like, Britt, are very different than things that I might like. And then there's a separate problem with, even if we like the same things, we might also be at different skill levels. Like, let's say we both enjoy skiing, kayaking, hiking, and mountain biking. Okay? Mm-hmm. We might be at very different skill levels, right? In terms of where we're at in those journeys. Like, if you put me in a kayak, like, man, I am just starting. Like, I am probably, like, hopefully won't hurt myself getting on the river the first time, type of thing. So, I think that's the other part of, like, what we're trying to do is we're trying to curate this journey for this person around each one of these experiences that, again, is about all phases of that journey. In many cases, it might start out with setting a goal, like you're going to go do this thing or you're going to go on this trip. So, I think that's the part that we, I would say we're really trying to refine our thinking around is like, how do we keep people engaged in that journey and all of those activities? And then the other thing we know about users is like they might do 3 to 4 activities a year, but they might over a lifetime do 12 to 15 different activities, right? And so how are you there in that right moment along that journey that sort of keeps them engaged and is getting them everything that they need? Because the one thing, it's interesting, like right now in the outdoor industry, there's a lot of talk about that it's like a $1.2 trillion industry now, right? Like very big industry. And by the way, longevity and like wellness is even much bigger than that, right? In terms of how
it goes so deep.
Yeah, so deep, right? But the thing that I always say is like, what if there was a lot less friction for the user? How many people would be engaged in wellness, longevity, outdoor activity? How many people that maybe tried something at one point and then they didn't have any success and dropped out because there was either a lot of friction or it wasn't right for them and then they didn't have an easy path into the next thing? And so, I think that's one of the things that not only we think a lot about it outside, but I think that many companies need to think about is like, how big could the category be if we actually really thought about how to reduce friction for that consumer, right? Mm-hmm.
I mean, I think what I hear you say a lot about here is talking about the users and talking about the consumers and talking about, that is such a wide swath of people, right? I mean, there's the person that goes out once a year. There's the person that is out 4 times a day doing, training for an Ironman. Speaking kind of personally, Robin, if you would, what does longevity sort of mean to you? Like, what are you looking at personally to implement in your life to be able to continue hopping on that trainer that is behind you and then getting on the bike that's, in the garage? What are you implementing in your life to really kind of ensure that longevity and be able to keep your flywheel moving?
It's sort of interesting. I was up at the World Cup event for U.S. Ski and Snowboard this weekend in Beaver Creek for Birds of Prey, and I got my first sort of 2 days of skiing in, because we skied in between, the events and stuff like that. And, I'm really sore today, Britt, which to me is like, this is, I'm 52, and I think about like that a little bit, and so I I think a lot about quality of life over duration. Like, in other words, I would much rather have the quality of life I have right now, where I'm relative. Again, I can pretty much do most activities that I want. I can also chase my kids, which is great.
Yeah.
And so, like, I want to be able to do that as long as possible. And so I've started to think a lot about what are all the things that I have to do that. So there's part of it that's like data analysis, pre-screening is like, I when I was running a consumer genetics company, I'm pretty, I would say, like, I don't have a lot of genetic things because I did a lot of genetic testing when I was running Helix. I don't have a lot of genetic things that I would say are out of the ordinary, but one I did have was a sort of an amplified risk of a certain thing, right? And so I'm doing a lot of preventative things more frequently around that maybe I wouldn't have normally done if I didn't know that information, right? So there's a lot of as you think about testing as an example, because like I'm really big into I use a service called Prenova that does basically full body MRIs, exactly. And so
we just had them on the podcast about a week ago.
Yeah, and so as an example, I've been doing that now for, I think I've done it every 3 years because the first one they had was in Palo Alto, which is where we lived, and so I think the first one I did was in 2016, right? And so when they were just starting, like the company was just getting going, they actually just put one in Denver, which is great. But so I think I'm thinking a lot more about preventative things that like give me information early. And by the way, there's a lot of different thinking on that. There's a lot of doctors that are anti full body MRIs because you're always going to find something. Like, you're going to find something. So like, is that good or bad? Again, I think it's sort of personal dependent. Like, some people don't want to know, and I totally fully respect that. But other people do, and I think that the tools are starting to get out there. Same thing with I think literally, I'm not joking, I think I have over 10 years of quarterly blood testing that I've done on myself so that I have all that baseline of data. And so, I'll use an example, like my cholesterol's always been high. So now I just look at my baseline different. I'm not like on statins or anything. I just think about it different than maybe I would have if I never had done blood testing regularly, right? So, when I think about longevity, I think there's a preemptive side to it, which is like kind of knowing so that you can, going back to this, most people don't know they have something for, could be 4 to 7 years before they actually have a symptom. I think that's something that has to do with longevity and quality of life. But then it's like, I think, I'm looking right now, like I'm starting to do more strength training because like I am, I'm just at a stage in my life where I need to think about it more. And I think like when I go
bone
skiing,
density, muscle mass, all of these things.
When I go skiing, I'm as sore as I was from 2 days of relatively easy skiing. It's not like I was in deep powder or anything. It's just a lot of awareness that I'm not 21 anymore, right? Like, I mean, it's not as easy for me to bounce back, and so I think all of those things are important. It's how I think about it kind of every day. But again, on the very basics, I just go back to this thing. Like, I do try to exercise every day because I feel like it's an investment in me. Do I eat perfectly all the time? No, but my wife is amazing at really doing well at the house, and so we tend to eat very well here. When I'm on the road, sometimes I don't eat that great type of thing, but generally I think about food in the same way. Is like, if you want to live a long time, you got to think about what you're putting in your body and what you're doing on a day-to-day basis.
Did your diet and nutrition change as you started to perhaps learn a little bit more based on that quarterly blood testing and perhaps learning some of those genetic biomarkers, lipoproteins, those things that we can't necessarily change, a conversation around epigenetics aside. But like when you learned these things, was that a little bit of an eye-opening experience for you? Was that something where you're like, well, this is an easy shift. Now that I know this, perhaps I shouldn't be eating X, Y, and Z and should be focusing more on, W, R, and Q. Talk about that a little bit.
I to be clear, like, I was doing blood testing even in the late 80s because I was a cyclist, and certainly when I was in Europe, they were doing very regular blood testing, and I would say that I've always used the data to do things like think about my supplements and think about, like maybe where I have deficiencies that I need to focus on or change diet. So I would say I've been consistently doing that for, really, I would argue almost 35 years, right? So for a long time. But I would say it's what I like about what's happening is it's getting more and more refined. In other words, like the tools, it used to be like, I'm using an example, if you went to Quest and you got a CBC, the doctor literally looked at it and they were like, you're fine. Like, you're fine. That was the recommendation. You're fine. Just keep doing what you're doing, Robin. You're great, right? I think now what I really like about some of these tools and these things that I'm seeing in the market is they're making more specific recommendations. And there's criticism of those specific recommendations, like how can you really tell me to take 300 milligrams of vitamin D? How can you really say that that's going to impact me in this way? And I agree to that to some extent. It's hard to make very specific dosage recommendations, but my view is that at least directionally, there's a lot of really good data in there for you or I to take advantage of as we think about how it's going to play into our overall wellness. And oh, by the way, you get it wrong sometimes too. Like, certainly, I've had supplements before that maybe didn't, they didn't like work in my system that well, and probably I didn't need them. I know there's a lot of debate about supplements in general, but I'm sort of a believer that we live in a world where there are deficiencies, like we're not eating as holistically as we once were, and so these are just things that I would say I sort of think about.
So, just kind of coming up on time here, speaking to our longevity audience, again, which is, focused on how can we, like you said, have that quality of life for as long as possible here. What is there any parting words? Is there any, some final advice that you would give just in terms of to someone who hasn't lived that life with access to the outdoors, with access to as many sports, and who is just kind of starting to get that flywheel going, no matter the age? What would you recommend or suggest?
I mean, Britt, it's baby steps to me. Like, I think it's I use this in sort of view in the outdoor industry, which is like for a long time, every brand that was out there basically like showed an image of an old white guy in a parka on Mount Everest. Like that was the thought of what the outdoors was, right? Mm-hmm. And that's not really the way I view it at all. Like, I mean, I grew up in inner city Denver. It was access to the parks, like just, getting to the parks that was a big advantage. And so like, that's what I say to people is like, start small, but with frequency. Like get out and, I tell people all the time, buy a dog. Because like you're gonna walk more if you get a dog, right? I think about it all in those like rather than big extreme diets or things like that. I think about it all as like consistency and sort of micro attempts at things that might work or not work for you. But like something like the outdoors to me, it's like all of us have access. Literally, all we got to do is walk out our front door.